The faint hum of radiation detectors filled the air as a group of cleanup workers moved cautiously through the abandoned streets of Pripyat. The once thriving city now stood silent, its crumbling buildings and overgrown paths whispering secrets from a disaster that had unfolded decades ago. It was here, in this eerie ghost town, where the unimaginable would surface, a crime so chilling it defied logic, hidden beneath layers of decay and despair. It started with a routine patrol. 2 officers assigned to monitor the exclusion zone approached what they thought was just another trespasser, a lone figure wandering near the edge of the Red Forest, one of the most contaminated areas in Chernobyl. As their boots crunched against the brittle leaves, the man turned around, his face pale under the moonlight. His voice trembled as he spoke, "You won't believe what I found." What followed was an account that sent shivers down their spines. The man claimed to have stumbled upon something buried deep within the ruins, an object tied to a sinister act committed long after the nuclear meltdown. But before the officers could question him further, his words trailed off into silence. He clutched his chest, collapsed, and died right there, leaving behind only cryptic clues etched onto scraps of paper tucked inside his jacket pocket. This wasn't just any death, it was the beginning of a mystery that would unravel truths darker than anyone dared imagine. In the heart of Chernobyl's haunting landscape, the echoes of tragedy lingered, but so did the shadows of human malice. For decades, the name Chernobyl has been synonymous with catastrophe, a symbol of humanity's hubris in the face of nature's raw power. On April 26, 1986, reactor number 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant exploded, releasing radioactive fallout across vast swaths of Europe. Overnight, the idyllic town of Pripyat became a ghost city, evacuated and left to rot. Time seemed to stand still among its decaying apartment blocks, rusting playgrounds, and forgotten schools. Yet amidst this desolation, life and crime continued in ways no one expected. The man who collapsed during the patrol was identified as Viktor Kuznetsov, a former scientist who worked at the power plant before the disaster. Born in 1958, Kuznetsov grew up idolizing science and progress, dreams fueled by Soviet propaganda about atomic energy being mankind's salvation. After the explosion, however, his idealism shattered. Haunted by survivor guilt, he disappeared from public view, re-emerging years later as a recluse obsessed with uncovering the truth behind Chernobyl's aftermath. Kuznetsov wasn't alone in his obsession. Rumors circulated among locals and researchers alike about strange occurrences within the exclusion zone. Some whispered of illegal smuggling rings trafficking radioactive materials, while others spoke of covert experiments conducted in secret laboratories hidden beneath the ruins. These tales often blurred fact and fiction, but they hinted at a shadowy underworld thriving despite, or perhaps because of, the dangers surrounding it. Enter Yevgeny Volkov, a seasoned detective known for his relentless pursuit of justice. Assigned to investigate Kuznetsov's sudden demise, Volkov brought years of experience working high-profile cases involving organized crime and corruption. Standing 6 feet tall with piercing blue eyes, he exuded authority even when surrounded by the oppressive atmosphere of the exclusion zone. To Volkov, Kuznetsov's death represented more than a random tragedy, it was a thread waiting to be pulled, leading deeper into the labyrinthine world of post-Chernobyl secrets. As Volkov delved into Kuznetsov's background, he uncovered fragments of a disturbing narrative. The scientist had spent months documenting anomalies within the zone, meticulously recording observations in journals filled with sketches, measurements, and cryptic notes. One entry stood out: "They are still here. Watching. Waiting." Below it, scrawled hastily, were coordinates pointing toward an unmarked location near the old hospital complex. Volkov assembled a team of experts to assist him, including forensic analyst Irina Petrova and radiological specialist Andrei Novikov. Together, they prepared to venture into the heart of the exclusion zone, following Kuznetsov's trail. What awaited them, however, went far beyond anything they could have anticipated. The journey began under cover of darkness, guided by GPS devices calibrated to withstand extreme radiation levels. Each step forward felt like stepping further into a nightmare. Overgrown weeds clawed at their boots, and the skeletal remains of buildings loomed ominously against the backdrop of a blood-red sky. Somewhere nearby, wolves howled, a reminder that humans weren't the only inhabitants of this forsaken place. Their destination lay buried beneath layers of debris, an underground bunker accessed via a narrow staircase descending into the earth. At the entrance, Volkov paused, flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. "Stay sharp," he muttered, his voice low yet commanding. "We don't know what we're walking into." Inside, the air grew thick with dust and the acrid scent of decay. Faint traces of writing covered the walls, smeared partially by time but legible enough to send chills down their spines. Phrases like "silence is safety" and "no witnesses" repeated endlessly, forming a macabre mantra. Further exploration revealed rooms stocked with medical supplies, laboratory equipment, and files containing classified documents stamped with the logo of the USSR Ministry of Health. But then came the discovery that changed everything. In the corner of a dimly lit chamber, Irina gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. There, preserved in a glass case, lay a human corpse, or rather, what remained of one. Its skin appeared unnaturally smooth, almost plastic-like, devoid of any signs of decomposition. Around its neck hung a tag bearing a single word: experimental. What is this?" Irina stammered, her voice trembling. Volkov knelt beside the body, examining it closely. "Not a body," he corrected grimly. "A specimen. Someone, or something, used these people as test subjects." Andrei joined them, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Look at the isotopic signature," he said, pointing to readings displayed on his handheld scanner. "This isn't natural radiation exposure. It's engineered. Someone manipulated their DNA using radiation as a catalyst." The implications were staggering. If true, it meant someone had exploited Chernobyl's catastrophic legacy not merely for profit or power but for experimentation on a scale previously unimaginable. And if Kuznetsov had uncovered evidence of such atrocities, his death might not have been accidental after all. As the team documented their findings, Volkov couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Shadows flickered at the edges of his vision, and distant whispers echoed through the corridors. Was it paranoia? Or something more sinister lurking in the darkness? Back above ground, Volkov called headquarters, his tone urgent. "Send reinforcements immediately. We need backup and answers." On the other end of the line, his superior responded tersely. "Understood. But tread carefully, Volkov. This goes higher than you think." The silence of the exclusion zone was broken only by the crunch of boots against the frozen ground. Detective Yevgeny Volkov led his team deeper into the heart of Chernobyl, their flashlights cutting through the oppressive darkness. The air smelled of decay and radiation, a constant reminder of the invisible danger lurking around every corner. As they approached the coordinates scrawled in Viktor Kuznetsov's journal, Volkov's instinct screamed that this was no ordinary investigation. He had faced organized crime before, but something about this case felt different, more insidious, more personal. Irina Petrova clutched her evidence bag tightly as she scanned the surroundings. "This place gives me the creeps," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. Andrei Novikov, the radiological specialist, nodded in agreement, his scanner beeping softly as it detected elevated levels of radiation. Volkov ignored their unease. He'd seen enough to know fear wouldn't solve anything. Instead, he focused on the task ahead. They arrived at an abandoned hospital complex, its crumbling walls covered in moss and graffiti. Inside, the stench of mildew and death hit them like a physical force. Dim light filtered through shattered windows, illuminating rows of rusted hospital beds and discarded medical equipment. It was here, according to Kuznetsov's notes, that the trail would lead them closer to uncovering the truth behind the experiments. Volkov knelt beside a pile of papers scattered across the floor. Among them was a faded photograph, a young boy with wide eyes staring straight into the camera. A chill ran down his spine. "Who are you?" he murmured, turning the photo over. On the back, written in shaky handwriting, were the words, "Subject number 43. "This isn't just some random operation," Irina said, examining another document. "It's systematic. Look at these records. They're tracking people, monitoring their health, recording mutations." Her voice cracked slightly as she read aloud from one of the files. "Patient exhibits accelerated cell growth. No visible side effects yet. What kind of monster writes something like that?" Andrei crouched nearby, analyzing the isotopic signatures on the documents. "These aren't natural mutations," he confirmed. "Someone's manipulating DNA using radiation exposure. They're creating something." As the team delved deeper into the archives, the full scope of the atrocities began to emerge. Hundreds of victims, many children, had been abducted and subjected to experimental procedures designed to harness the mutagenic properties of radiation. Some survived long enough to be studied further, others perished quickly, their bodies disposed of like garbage. The sheer scale of the operation left everyone speechless. But there was more. Tucked away in a locked cabinet, Volkov found blueprints for a facility hidden beneath the hospital. The drawings depicted elaborate laboratories equipped with advanced technology far beyond what anyone expected to find in such a desolate area. This wasn't built after the disaster, Volkov realized aloud. It predates it. Someone planned all of this years ago. Back at the precinct, Volkov pored over the newly uncovered evidence, piecing together fragments of the puzzle. Kuznetsov's obsession with exposing the truth now made sense. He hadn't just stumbled upon a conspiracy, he'd dedicated his life to unraveling it. But why had he died so suddenly? And who, or what, had silenced him? A breakthrough came when Irina cross-referenced the names mentioned in the documents with public records. One name stood out: Dr. Elena Markova, the geneticist linked to the Soviet-era research programs. According to official accounts, she disappeared shortly after the Chernobyl disaster, presumed dead in the chaos that followed. However, Irina discovered discrepancies in her disappearance timeline, suggesting she might still be alive and actively involved in the experiments. Markova could be our key witness, or our prime suspect, Volkov told his team. "We need to find her." Their search led them to a small village located outside the exclusion zone, where locals spoke of a reclusive woman living in seclusion. Descriptions matched those of Markova, though none dared approach her home due to rumors of strange occurrences emanating from within. Armed with warrants and backup, Volkov and his team set out to confront her. When they arrived, the house appeared deserted, its windows boarded up and vines creeping up the walls. Yet as they entered, faint sounds echoed through the halls, whispering voices, mechanical whirs, and distant cries. In the basement, they discovered a makeshift lab filled with vials containing glowing liquids and jars preserving human organs. At the center of the room stood a figure cloaked in shadows. "Dr. Markova?" Volkov called out cautiously. The figure turned slowly, revealing a gaunt face lined with age and regret. "Detective Volkov," she replied, her voice raspy but steady. "You've come too late." Over the next few hours, Markova recounted her story, painting a picture of ambition gone horribly wrong. She admitted to participating in the early stages of the experiments, driven by a desire to push the boundaries of science. Initially, the work seemed promising, developing treatments for radiation sickness, enhancing cellular regeneration, but soon spiraled into darker territory as political pressures forced ethical considerations aside. "I tried to stop them," she confessed, tears streaming down her cheeks. "But once you're in, there's no way out. They threatened my family, destroyed everything I held dear. By the time I escaped, it was already too late." Her testimony provided crucial details about the network orchestrating the experiments. Names emerged: government officials, corporate executives, and foreign agents, all complicit in exploiting Chernobyl's legacy for profit and power. Markova handed over additional evidence she'd managed to preserve, including video footage documenting the horrors committed within the underground facilities. Yet even as she cooperated, Volkov couldn't shake the feeling that Markova herself wasn't entirely innocent. Her motives remained murky, her role ambiguous. Was she a victim or a perpetrator? Or perhaps both? With new leads in hand, Volkov expanded the investigation, enlisting help from international partners to track down the remaining members of the conspiracy. Arrests followed swiftly, implicating high-profile figures whose involvement sent shockwaves through political circles worldwide. Public outrage erupted as news outlets exposed the extent of the cover-up, demanding answers and accountability. One of the most significant arrests involved Sergei Grigorev, the smuggler implicated earlier in the case. Under intense interrogation, Grigorev revealed details about a black market ring trafficking radioactive materials and experimental subjects across borders. His testimony implicated several prominent scientists and businessmen, forcing authorities to take drastic measures to dismantle the operation. Meanwhile, Volkov continued searching for subject number 43, the boy in the photograph. Interviews with surviving witnesses suggested he might still be alive, hidden somewhere within the exclusion zone. Determined to bring closure to the families affected by the experiments, Volkov vowed to locate him at any cost. His persistence paid off when a local guide reported seeing a child matching the description near an isolated cabin deep within the Red Forest. With caution, Volkov and his team approached the location, finding signs of recent habitation, an open fire pit, fresh footprints, and scraps of clothing bearing the same logo as the ones documented in the bunker. Inside the cabin, they discovered a frail boy huddled in the corner, his skin unnaturally pale and his movements jerky. Despite his condition, his eyes sparkled with intelligence and defiance. "Who are you?" he asked weakly, his voice tinged with suspicion. "We're here to help," Volkov assured him gently, extending a hand. "You're safe now." The boy hesitated before accepting the offer, allowing himself to be guided outside. Medical teams rushed him to a nearby clinic for treatment, while Volkov stayed behind to secure the scene. Among the belongings left behind, he found a notebook filled with drawings and writings detailing the boy's experiences. Each page bore witness to unimaginable suffering endured with remarkable resilience. As the investigation progressed, Volkov faced increasing pressure from higher-ups to wrap things up quietly. Officials worried about the diplomatic fallout and potential economic consequences if the full extent of the conspiracy became public knowledge. Some even suggested burying the evidence altogether, framing it as a necessary sacrifice for national security. But Volkov refused to compromise. "If we sweep this under the rug," he argued during a heated meeting with his superiors, "we dishonor every victim who suffered because of these crimes. Justice demands transparency, not secrecy." His stance earned him enemies within the department, but also allies among journalists and activists eager to expose the truth. Together, they launched a campaign to ensure the findings reached the widest possible audience. Documentaries, articles, and social media posts brought global attention to the issue, sparking debates about ethics in scientific research and the responsibilities of governments toward their citizens. In the end, several key figures were prosecuted, including former government ministers and corporate CEOs. While not everyone involved faced justice, the case marked a turning point in how society viewed the intersection of science, politics, and morality. For the first time, victims and their families received acknowledgement and compensation, albeit belatedly. Standing amidst the ruins of the exclusion zone, Volkov reflected on the journey that had transformed him, from a seasoned detective chasing criminals to a crusader fighting for truth and accountability. The weight of the responsibility pressed heavily on his shoulders, but he knew the fight wasn't over. Crimes born of greed and ambition continued to fester in hidden places, waiting for brave souls willing to expose them. As dawn broke over the desolate landscape, casting long shadows across the crumbling buildings, Volkov allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. The investigation had consumed months of his life, testing his resolve and pushing him to confront truths darker than anything he'd imagined. Yet, despite the horrors uncovered, there was a strange sense of fulfillment in knowing that justice had finally begun to take root. Victims were no longer nameless faces buried in forgotten files. They had been given voices, their stories brought to light. And though not every perpetrator faced consequences, the system itself had been shaken awake, forced to reckon with its complicity in decades of silence. Volkov's thoughts turned to subject number 43, the boy whose discovery had become both the heartbreak and triumph of the case. After weeks of intensive care, the child, now identified as Ivan Petrov, showed signs of recovery. His health remained fragile, marked by lingering effects of the experiments, but his spirit burned bright. Through therapy and support from specialists, Ivan began piecing together fragments of his past, recalling snippets of a childhood stolen too soon. He spoke often of dreams of running through open fields, playing with other children, living a life unshackled by fear or pain. For Volkov, these moments of hope served as a powerful reminder of why he had pursued this case so relentlessly. The legal proceedings against those implicated in the conspiracy stretched on for months, each trial revealing new layers of corruption and deceit. High-profile figures once untouchable behind veils of power and privilege found themselves stripped bare before the court of public opinion. Sentences ranged from lengthy prison terms to permanent bans from holding public office, sending a clear message that such abuses would no longer be tolerated. While some criticized the verdicts as insufficient, others hailed them as a step toward meaningful reform, a vindication of sorts for the countless lives affected by the experiments. Beyond the courtroom battles, the impact of the case rippled outward, igniting conversations far beyond the borders of Ukraine. Governments around the world scrambled to review their own research protocols, ensuring safeguards were in place to prevent similar atrocities. Universities and scientific institutions issued statements condemning unethical practices, pledging greater transparency in all future endeavors. Activists seized the momentum, organizing campaigns aimed at raising awareness about the dangers of unchecked ambition and the importance of ethical oversight in science. Chernobyl, once synonymous solely with disaster, became a symbol of resilience and redemption, a testament to what could be achieved when courage met perseverance. For Volkov, however, the true measure of success lay not in accolades or headlines but in the personal connections forged along the way. Irina Petrova, whose expertise had been instrumental in unraveling the evidence, decided to stay on as part of a newly formed investigative unit dedicated to exposing environmental crimes. Andrei Novikov expanded his work in radiological safety, developing technologies designed to protect communities living near contaminated areas. Even Dr. Mokova, though burdened by guilt, chose to use her remaining years contributing to efforts aimed at repairing the damage done by her former colleagues. Together, they formed an unlikely alliance bound by shared purpose and mutual respect. One evening, as Volkov sat alone in his office reviewing the final reports, his phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was Natalia Ivanova, the elderly woman who had first spoken of seeing strangers arriving in hazmat suits after the evacuation. Her voice trembled with emotion as she thanked him for bringing closure to a chapter of her life long shrouded in mystery. "You've given us back our peace," she said softly. "And maybe, just maybe, you've given us back a little bit of hope." Tears pricked at the corners of Volkov's eyes as he listened to her words. Hope, it was a fragile thing, easily crushed under the weight of despair, yet capable of enduring even the harshest storms. In the aftermath of the investigation, he realized that hope wasn't something handed down from above. It was built brick by brick, person by person, through acts of courage and compassion. The following week, Volkov attended a memorial service held for the victims of the experiments. Families gathered beneath a towering oak tree planted in memory of those lost, its branches stretching skyward like outstretched arms. Speeches were delivered, poems recited, and candles lit in silent tribute. As Volkov stood among the mourners, he felt a profound sense of connection, not just to the people present but to the land itself, scarred yet resilient, bearing witness to humanity's darkest moments while still offering glimpses of light. In the days that followed, life returned to a semblance of normalcy, though nothing could truly erase the scars left by the investigation. Volkov resumed his duties at the precinct, tackling cases ranging from petty thefts to organized crime rings. Each challenge reminded him of the lessons learned during the Chernobyl ordeal, that evil thrives in secrecy, that justice requires vigilance, and that even the smallest act of defiance can spark change. On one particularly quiet afternoon, Volkov received an unexpected visitor, Ivan Petrov, accompanied by a social worker assigned to oversee his transition into foster care. The boy approached shyly, clutching a small sketchpad filled with drawings of vibrant landscapes and smiling faces. He handed one to Volkov, a simple yet beautiful depiction of two figures standing side by side beneath a golden sunrise. "This is for you," Ivan whispered, his cheeks flushed with pride. "Thank you." Volkov studied the drawing for a long moment, feeling a lump rise in his throat. He placed a hand gently on the boy's shoulder. "You're welcome, Ivan," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "But remember, you're the one who deserves the thanks. You've shown us all what it means to survive, to heal, and to dream again." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Volkov walked slowly back to his car. The air carried the faint hum of distant cicadas, a sound almost musical in its rhythm. For the first time in months, he felt a genuine sense of peace, not because the fight was over, but because he understood it never truly ended. There would always be shadows lurking in the corners of the world, waiting to prey upon the vulnerable. But there would also always be people willing to stand against them, armed with nothing more than determination and a belief in the possibility of better tomorrows. This tragic event reminds us that even the safest communities are not immune to the unexpected, Volkov murmured, gazing at the horizon. But it also teaches us that courage and perseverance can illuminate even the darkest corners of our world. With renewed purpose, he climbed into his car and drove off into the twilight, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The road stretched endlessly before him, winding through forests and fields, cities and villages, each turn bringing new opportunities to make a difference. And though the weight of responsibility remained ever present, Volkov carried it proudly, knowing that some battles were worth fighting, not for glory or recognition, but for the chance to leave the world just a little brighter than he'd found it.